G'day and welcome back to Plant Profiles of this Vlogmas, and today we are joined by a fantastic guest. We've got Becca de la Plants, and she's going to be sharing with us her Hoya carnosa compacta. Here she is.
Hello, I'm Becca from Becca de la Plants, and today I'm going to be talking about the Hoya carnosa compacta, or also known as the Hoya Hindu rope. As you can see, it is a very long trailing Hoya plant. You won't always find them this big in the stores, but they will definitely grow to this size if you give them plenty of time and patience. So the Hoya compacta is a hybrid of the Hoya carnosa. There are a lot of different hybrids, and this happens to be one of the more popular ones, and it is known for its leaves that look a lot like tortellini. So if you've ever had tortellini pasta, this should ring familiar. This is actually a variegated form. You can see that there is some white and also some white along the tips. However, this plant is a twofer that has a reverted branch right here, so you can sort of see what the full green would look like as well. It's a really lovely plant and super easy to care for. So if you want success with this plant, I would suggest giving it the brightest light that you can offer it indoors, which for the northern hemisphere would be a south window, for the southern hemisphere would be a north window. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but you definitely want to give this plant plenty of light. You will see lots of new growth when that happens. Just with Hoyas in general, they love light. If you give it too much light, however, it will do some bleaching, possibly get sunburned. But if that does happen, the plant will be okay. It will recover and it will adapt. But I would say give it as high light as you can and you will see the best results. As far as watering goes, with all of my Hoyas, I don't water them until they get wrinkly, which this is a perfect example because I just watered this plant and it's still a little bit wrinkly. So I'll show you a close-up of what that looks like when they're wrinkly. It just looks a little bit like this. So until the plant looks like this, I leave it, I don't touch it, I just leave it alone. I ignore it until it gets wrinkly, and then I will give it a very thorough watering. The pot, as you can see, is quite small for a plant this size. This is actually the original pot that I put it in, and I do see a few roots coming out the bottom, so it is almost time for repotting, but I would say that I keep the plant relatively root bound so that it will put its energy into new branches or growing branches or just blooms in general. I haven't had this plant bloom before, but I have had a different Hoya compacta bloom, and it smells like Tootsie Rolls, and it is so cute. Hoya blooms are really cool because once the bloom is finished blooming, all of the little pieces will fall off, and then it will start to rebloom again. So if you ever do see any of your Hoyas blooming, leave those peduncles. That is what the bloom, the preliminary bloom is called. It's called a peduncle. So when you see that, just leave it, and it will regrow flowers. I think my other one flowered like 5 or 6 times off of one peduncle. It was really cool. Being that this plant is an epiphyte, it gets a lot of its nutrients from its leaves. So if you want to use a foliar spray to fertilize the plant, you can do that to offer it some extra fertilizer. But other than that, I would say fertilize it about once a month with your preferred fertilizer, maybe a little bit diluted because sometimes they do tend to be a bit strong. I prefer organic fertilizer because there's a lot less of a chance of fertilizer burn and all of those types of things. And then as far as pests go, the pest that likes this plant the most is probably the mealybug, because as you can see, there are so many little places to hide, and mealybugs are really easy to see, but it's a lot harder when they're dug into these little grooves. So whenever I water my plant, I make sure to take all of the little tendrils and sort of put my sink on like the highest frequency it can go on, like a power wash situation. Not so hard that it'll break the plant, but definitely I wash it pretty good so that I can get in all of these grooves, so that if there is anything living in here that isn't supposed to, it will be knocked off. I will say I have never had a mealybug on this plant before, but I have on my other Hoya compacta, and it was really easy to spot as long as I was looking for it. So just as long as you're actively looking, especially for mealybugs, that is really the only pest I've ever had on a Hoya before. Hoya are in general really resistant to pests like spider mites and thrips and other things like that. Not to say it will never happen, so you should definitely be looking. All right, you guys, that is all my information on the Hoya compacta variegata. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing your knowledge there, Becca. Awesome. If you would like to check Becca out, there is a link to her YouTube channel, Becca de la Plants, down below. Also her Instagram and her podcast, Potted Together. You might remember that we had Nicole from Michaeline Leaves on this Vlogmas earlier in the month. She also does that podcast. So make sure you're checking that out if you have appreciated their knowledge. It's a fantastic podcast. Thank you once again for watching. Make sure you subscribe to Scott Grows an Avocado Tree. Make sure you check out Becca's links in the description below, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Scott grows an avocado tree. Scott grows an avocado tree. Scott grows an avocado tree. Scott grows an avocado tree.